Hello guys, it's D to the B here, and I'm gonna do less of a deconstruction than usual because unfortunately when I first did the original version of this video, it was already 20 minutes on the recording and I didn't even finish episode 1. That's how long it took. Now, I gotta discuss about the series itself, plot, the stories, the designs, the animation, all of that. So why don't we get to the plot of the story? So the plot of the story is Peter Parker is starting his new life at high school as a freshman, and he's going to meet new friends, but at the same time, a random attack from a symbiote comes in the school, and also Doctor Strange is trying to stop said symbiote. But after Doctor Strange deals with the symbiote, because at the same time there was a spider coming out of the sky portal, and the spider bites Peter, and we transition to a few months later where now he has the ability of Spider-Man, and he's gotta save the day and do his normal high school life. Pretty much every single Spider-Man continuity exists out of the world. And in the process of Peter doing his normal thing, Norman Osborn comes to have Peter join in a internship for him because he recognizes his talent. And at the same time, while Peter's doing this, he has to juggle 3 different lives: his friend life, his life, and his life as Peter Parker. Eventually, I think it's the 3rd episode, Norman finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Now, this is a pretty common trope in Spider-Man lore, Norman finding out Peter is Spider-Man. They did it in the Raimi trilogy, and I'm pretty sure the original 90s show, at some point, Green Goblin learned that Peter Parker was Spider-Man, so this is nothing new, of course. And then, at the same time, when Norman finds out that he's Spider-Man, he tries having him try all these suits that he made, which of course a lot of them sucked and failed throughout, and he's just facing normal bad guys. We also get this weird side plot with a young Tombstone, because it starts off with him being this football player, and he makes a friendship with Peter. Peter thinks that he's stupid because he's a football player, that cliche. And he surprisingly shows Peter that he's pretty smart for a football player. And of course, his younger brother has joined a gang, and it's like, why not? Let's do a gang. Of course, all the characters are of color. Man, what a stereotype. And I hate the term racial stereotype. I hate when they bring the race and the gender thing into shows and movies. I just find it funny as a company like Disney who claims they're progressive and they don't fall into common cliches. Then they do this common cliche. Typical hypocritical Disney. And honestly, I don't even care about this gang stuff. It's boring. Like, I really don't care about all the gang wars and all that. I didn't come here to see a gang show. I came here to see the Spider-Man show. Why is this in the show? Now, if it was a side thing, sure, fine. But a lot of the episodes in the show are focused more on the gang and other stuff more than Peter Parker himself, especially since the show is only limited to 10 episodes. So, with that limited time, we should probably build more off of Peter. Now, yes, I know there are shows that away from the characters, and I get that. There will be moments where it will pan away for a couple minutes and then go back to the main character, or they'll get a whole center episode. The thing, just one episode or one scene of the episode. It's most of the show. Now, one YouTuber did bring this up because I felt like something was off with the show when I first watched it. YouTuber Vader brought up a really good point. about what was wrong with the show and why the emotions don't feel right. It's because it pans away from Peter too much. Like, it's either panning away for the stupid gang plotline or it's panning away from other characters. Fortunately, the panning away stays way too long and doesn't go away. It's like most of the episodes, like when they were doing the whole gang thing in the beginning, like the first episode it appeared in, the episodes at that point were focused more on the game and the young Tombstone more than Parker. It just made no sense, and it also panned away from Peter when they were doing that whole plot line or that episode where Harry and Nico, the friend and possibly love interest of this universe of Spider-Man, pans away from him too much, especially the episode where there's too much going on for him and he's like having this mental breakdown, like there's this happening and that happening and it's too much for me to handle. It doesn't feel earned because the show isn't focusing too much on the main character, which is Peter Parker. And it doesn't matter if it's Peter Parker that it focuses on or Spider-Man that it focuses on. It doesn't matter. It's not focusing on him. It's mostly focusing on this stupid filler stuff. Stuff you can cut out a bit, but still have it a part of your story. But they're choosing to have it be most of the story of the Spider-Man show. It's frustrating. And especially since the stuff isn't really that interesting to begin with. But I'll say, even the Peter stuff isn't really that interesting. Like, the villains in the show are kind of boring. I will say, I was intrigued with Scorpion for a little bit. Scorpion, I'll say, had a few good moments. Doc Ock was okay. I felt like there could have been a better voice for Doc Ock at the same time. It just results into nothing. Eventually, Peter gets a new suit. Before that, we get a cameo from Daredevil, which is played by Charlie Cox. And I'll say, even though I'm not a huge fan of this show, which I'll get back into in a bit, I will say how they did Daredevil in this show was amazing. It's way better than how the MCU has been treating him. Like, first of all, not only did he meet up with She-Hulk and slept with She-Hulk, that abomination monster, but hearing the things that I've heard about Born Again is just awful. And it's nice to see Daredevil finally treated with some gosh darn respect. The reason Daredevil's in this is because Norman is planning something, and then near the end of the show, Norman has this, like, thing which goes into space, but Doctor Strange is there to stop it, or try to stop it, but then a symbiote comes in, and yes, from what it sounds like, you know where this is leading. So, of course, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and the symbiote, where eventually Doctor Strange brings the symbiote back in time, so that whole event of the spider biting Peter could work. Now, originally, when Doctor Strange said that he's never seen them before, I figured that the Doctor Strange that visited them was an evil version of him, or somebody impersonating him. But then, as soon as the portal opened up, I'm like, they're going that direction. And it did, surprisingly. And then the show ends off with Peter and Norman going their own separate ways. Harry is starting a business for people like Peter into the internship without being pressured by teachers and yada yada yada. The end. Now that's the summary of the show. So why don't we get into how it was executed? So for context, for me to get into the plot, I need to explain that this show was originally connected to the MCU. Originally, this was going to be the origin story of the MCU Peter Parker and how he gained his abilities, all of his adventures before Captain America Civil War. But of course, with the limitations they had with the 3 films and also on the story, the creators decided to change it and make it its own universe, which I'll give the studio credit for making this its own thing, because it would be cool to see Peter before Civil War, but at the same time, you don't want to also be limited, and with a new story, you could a new experience and have more freedom control. And also, I'll say, it is a little bit refreshing to have a show that isn't connected to the MCU in so long. Yes, I know X-Men 97 exists, but that is a whole separate thing. So I will not be talking about that until I eventually watch the series itself. The execution of it. So, I have to say this. The execution wasn't great. But, I will say, it had a promising start. The first episode was actually not that bad. I was actually surprised that the show hooked me in with the first episode. And I would say kind of the second episode too. Maybe a bit of a downgrade from the first one, but it was interesting and it was surprisingly reeling in to the idea of this new Spider-Man. And of course, the main actor of the show, the one who plays Peter Parker, saying that he was worried that it was going to be boring, annoying, and woke, which we'll get back into that. So, the story itself had a good start, but then episode 3 is where the show fell off, and it became boring. Now, even though I liked the first episode, in my head I'm like, they're going to screw this up somehow. They're going to show promise in the beginning, and then the show is going to completely fall off after that, which happened. And when I was watching the show with my friends, I was just bored through the entire thing at that point. The show had just became uninteresting. Now, were there some highlights of the show? Absolutely. Like, I will say, Nico finding out Peter was Spider-Man was actually pretty good, and it wasn't another Amber situation. Now, yes, I did watch some of Invincible. I think I'm like halfway of season 2, if I'm not mistaken. But enough about Invincible, which I would rather have watched at the time. We are continuing on with the plot. It just fell off. And also, it steals a lot of things from the MCU because obviously this thing was connected to the MCU at one point. Like, there's the reference of Spider-Man stopping the car or the van from hitting the bus. We got that reference. We also get a reference to the Soviet Accords from Captain America Civil War. Now, I originally remember calling this lazy, like, knowing the context of it being formerly a MCU-connected show, I'm like, man, the writers got really lazy and didn't take out this plot line. And I remember a friend being pissed off that I said it because he's like, oh, it's an alternate universe. I'm like, it could be, but it's also still lazy. Like, there are plenty of other comic plot lines they could have done, but they chose not to. Yes, you could say it's an alternate universe, but it's knowing that context, it's like they changed things, but then they didn't go all the way with it. Now, this is a small nitpick, and maybe not everyone agrees with me. That's fair. That friend certainly didn't. So yeah, the story fell off at episode 3, but it had a promising start, and it sucked because I was actually enjoying this show. I was surprised that I was, because I expected it to be a dumpster fire from episode 1, because that's what I'm so used to. Granted, I'm also used to shows falling off later on as they go for Disney standards, but I was really hoping that this show would break that trend, and it would have been something Marvel related that I would have liked that wasn't bad. It would have been so nice. But they couldn't follow up with the good quality of the show, and the show just became boring after that. Then let's get into the extra stuff. Let's start with the woke comment. Now, is Spider-Man or your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man woke? Kind of. It is kind of woke. There are a lot of woke elements to it. Usually, when the term woke is thrown around, it's usually like, oh, they're going to be more focused on diversity than actually writing a good story, which has been the case a lot. It's happened time and time again. It's too predictable, unless if you're a shill, where they go like, wow, something sucked, I'm actually shocked. Even though they've probably seen this like a million times. But blindly follow Disney because it's Disney and they're progressive, so we need to support them, even if they're feeding us garbage. And now, yes, I probably know that somebody's gonna get offended that I said the word woke, because the word woke is losing its meaning, yada, yada, yada. But unfortunately, I have to mention it because it's a part of the show. The actor said it wasn't annoying and woke, so I have to cover it in this one case. And personally, I think the term woke is still accurate because, unfortunately, woke does not mean the same thing that it meant, like, years ago. Woke used to mean, like, being aware of, like, the government or higher ups are doing. Unfortunately, woke has now become this thing of diversity, and people who are doing this diversity don't even care about diversity at all, except to get check marks and appreciation for standing for the culture, even though they don't really care. Because if they really cared, they would care about things like that characters of color shouldn't just be race swaps of white characters, and also that women characters shouldn't be gender swaps of male characters. They claim to care about this stuff, but they fight the wrong people on it. Like, they're very anti big corporation and everything needs to be fair, but they don't even attack the companies who have like billions or even millions of dollars, because they're focused on the smaller companies or political opponents that don't agree with them and they need to be destroyed immediately in their view of eyes. But constantly consume this utter nonsense from big companies like Disney. It drives me insane and proves that they really don't care about diversity or equal rights or any of that stuff. And it frustrates me that people are still stupid enough to fall for stuff that Disney does, or other companies with their gender swapping or their race swapping or pandering to gays or any of that. It drives me insane. And also, there's the fact that not every person of color or a woman is going to like these decisions. There are plenty of people in those groups that these people trying to represent. They're actually women and people of color who don't care about this stuff and just want to live normal life. There are people on those that really just don't agree with this modern messaging. But why don't I get into the next elephant in the room? Norman and Harry and Dr. Connors being race and gender swap. Now let's start with Norman. When I heard they were race swapping Norman at first, I figured it was going to be unnecessary. It's not going to fit to the plot. It's going to be for political reasons. I just hate the concept of race swapping. Like, just make new characters, guys. Don't change the past. Just make new characters. Oh, wait, no, you can't. You can't write for your life. That's why you're race swapping, because you have nothing to come up with. But anyway, continuing on with Norman, he was surprisingly okay. I thought he was going to be annoying through the whole show and push down Peter like, oh, I'm better because I'm this skin color and you're yucky white or something like that. I was actually shocked that he was okay. Was he interesting? Absolutely not. But he isn't the worst race swap I've seen. We have had way worse race swaps over the years. Now let's get into Harry. I personally didn't like Harry in this show. I felt like he felt like nothing like the character whatsoever. He was way too awkward and weird. Where Harry in the past was more open and more popular because his father, Norman Osborn, is one of the richest people in the universe, or at least Marvel, besides Tony Stark. And then let's get into Dr. Connors. I mean, she barely did anything, but I hate they both race swapped and gender swapped Dr. Connors. Like, this was completely unnecessary. Just stop race swapping in general. Personally, for me, no one's going to agree with me on it, but I find race swapping pretty racist in my eyes, because it feels like that companies don't think that characters of color or new ones could profit themselves high enough to work, so they just take a legacy of a character who was white and just change him into a different color. Now, it isn't as bad as gender swapping. I think gender swapping is worse, but my point still stands. If Disney and other companies that did this progressive stuff actually cared, they would make new characters and write them good enough so people like me and you could enjoy them. But no, Disney can't do that, so they use the lazy card and just race swap the past. Now, is there race swaps that do work? Yes, but that hasn't happened in so long. Like, the last good race swap was Nick Fury, and then before that was Wilson Fisk in the Daredevil movie in 2003. But I think I've had enough with this diversity stuff. Why don't we move on to the animation itself? So the animation is obviously trying to replicate the old comic book look. And I'll say, I didn't hate the animation when it was revealed in the trailers. I thought it was fine. Now, looking back on it and thinking about other stuff that did the comic book thing before this show, yeah, this animation is kind of weak. Not terrible, but it's weak when it comes to trying to look like the comics, because Spider-Man and the Ultimate Spider-Man game from PS2 outbeat this thing when it comes to looking like the comics. Like, those games, that game and that movie did really good trying to make it look like the comics that it was based off of. This, it feels like it could have used a bit more color, to be honest. More shading or something like that. It just feels off in my eyes. And then why don't we get into characters? I mean, Peter's okay. Nico was not terrible. Harry, as I said, I didn't really care. Norman was fine. Dr. Octavius was okay. Iron Man was fine, even though he was barely in the show. Daredevil, as I said, amazing. The villains, they were pretty lame. The gang people, also pretty lame. Again, I didn't care for this stupid gang plot. And this probably could have worked for like a whole nother show. Like, I don't understand why the gang was such a big part in most of the screen time once the gang showed up in the show. I don't understand. And who else was there? Oh yeah, and a bunch of background characters. I didn't care about them. I didn't like any of them, especially this one teacher guy was very annoying. But yeah, that's about it. Why don't we get into the final conclusion? Now, again, show had so much potential. This show almost had me excited for something in so long. Can you imagine how much trash I have seen for so long? And it was a nice fresh breath of air for a bit. And no, the show isn't absolute garbage like other shows. It's just simply boring. It's a drag. Just because it's better than other medias doesn't mean it's good. It still has a lot of issues. And personally, I'm not invested. I just was bored through the entire time, except for the first 2 episodes. And now this shows us that we have to be even more careful with what we watch because Hollywood studios and actors are going to trick us. Now, is there a chance the actor actually said this and this is his genuine thoughts? Perhaps, but at the same time, it doesn't seem realistic for a guy to say that on a filming project and not be fired. Remember what happened to Gina Carano? She disagreed with a lot of what Hollywood and Lucasfilm were saying, but then she got fired for it because she was going against Disney's public image. So at the same time, it doesn't feel realistic that this guy would say that but not get fired. Like, besides Tim Allen, no one can escape nowadays with saying their own personal thoughts, especially when it goes against the Hollywood bubble. You'll be kicked out immediately. That's just unfortunately how the Hollywood game has become. We have gotten this low. But that's all I have to say. If you like the show, sure, fine, whatever. You can like it. But I just don't really care for it. And personally, for my opinion, I think we should raise our expectations a bit higher. We can't just keep accepting things that are okay at best. We need to excel our expectations because if we're just going to stay with, oh, it's okay, Disney is never going to learn. And no, even if the show was good, it's still going to take a lot for us to forgive Disney for all the stuff they have done to their brands, how they treated their fans for criticizing them. And if you are instantly thinking about forgiving Disney after you like this show or something else they've done recently, don't even think about it. Hold Disney accountable until they've properly apologized and their projects are very good again. But anyway, I would say I have to give this show maybe I'll be a bit generous than I am with usually Disney's products, and especially Captain America Brave New World. I will give this a 4 out of 10. It's not great, but I will say it's higher, in my opinion, than Captain America Brave New World because the potential was very exciting from the start, but just fell off after that. But anyway, how did you feel about your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you think it was boring like I did? Tell me in the comments, and have a nice day, everyone.